Drunk deer. What does that phrase conjure in your mind? What kind of image does it bring forth? I'm willing to bet it's some kind of inebriated, belligerent, antlered ungulate. And I'm willing to bet it's probably not a 75% mechanical keyboard with magnetic Hall effect switches. And yet, the latter is what we are here to talk about today from a brand called DrunkDeer. Today, we are taking a look at the DrunkDeer A75 non-mechanical keyboard, as they call it here on the front of the box. That is because the DrunkDeer A75 uses, as I said, mechanical switches based on the Hall effect, which detects the proximity of the stem to the bottom out point as you press it down without any physical contact being made between parts of a circuit. And this has a couple of advantages. One, it improves the durability and longevity of the switches by removing points of failure, friction, right? Two, it allows for all kinds of fun stuff like dynamically adjusting the actuation point of the switch, the point at which the key press is actually registered, on the fly. And that is one of the selling points of the DrunkDeer A75. DrunkDeer is a startup company, brand new, based out of Hong Kong. This is their first foray into the keyboard space, and you guys know me. I love to check out keyboards from companies I've never heard of before. These startups that are trying new stuff and innovating in the mechanical keyboard space. So when DrunkDeer reached out and asked if I would like to check out their brand new A75, I said, of course. This is a sponsored video. They're paying me to show you this keyboard and to talk about it, but all of the opinions here are strictly my own. Now, I have some good news for you. One is that DrunkDeer has supplied us with a discount code. If you like what you see here over the course of the video, be sure to check out the link at the top of the video description and the discount code ASMR. It will work for 1 month from the time of this video's release, and it will save you 30% on this keyboard, which is fairly significant savings. The keyboard is nominally $150 US, but with those 30% savings, it becomes quite a bit more palatable in its price point. And also, DrunkDeer has seen fit to supply us with a second keyboard. That is, they sent me 2 of their A75s. One I am reviewing here, but the other is available for one of you to win. There is a link down below, also in the video description, where you can find details on how to enter to win your very own DrunkDeer A75. Make sure you click through and check that out ASAP, because that's going to be running for, let's say, a week after this video is posted. So if you want to get into that competition, get your entries in as soon as you can. But back to the keyboard here. The DrunkDeer A75 is a 75% layout keyboard. As the name suggests, it comes with a rotary encoder, a knob, which is a very popular feature these days. It has full RGB backlighting, and it has these custom magnetic switches. And you might have heard of other keyboards with these Hall effect magnetic switches before. In fact, I reviewed one here on the channel, the Wooting 60HE, just last year. And I get the feeling that that is the target market for DrunkDeer here. They are looking to, I think, undercut companies like Wooting offering a similar kind of product, this non-mechanical switch. And as I said, it does have its advantages, like that user configurable actuation point. And if you are a gamer who really needs the very, very fastest response time, you need your switches to operate on a hair trigger, well, these magnetic switches definitely get you there. With a 0.2 millimeter minimum actuation distance, you barely have to brush the keys for them to actuate. So, the DrunkDeer A75, that's the long and the short, or the short of it at least. We're about to get into the long of it right now because we've got a lot of video ahead of us. So buckle up, sit back, and let's take a closer look at the DrunkDeer A75. Oh, and one more thing. You might hear me call this the M75 throughout the video, and indeed it does say M75 on the box. However, on DrunkDeer's website, it says A75, and in the email they originally contacted me with, they also called it the A75, so I'm pretty sure it's called the A75. It just says M75 on the box for reasons. This is a very early product. This is a brand new product from a brand new company, and it's only just coming to market. So a few bugs in the packaging and presentation are perhaps to be expected. But if I start calling it the M75 and then later in the video switch to A75, that's why. I just didn't want you to be confused or disoriented about that. There is only one keyboard we are talking about, the DrunkDeer A75. And now we're going to actually go and take a closer look at it. And here we have the DrunkDeer M75 in box. And I'm a little disappointed because I don't see any DrunkDeer on the box. But so be it, I guess. I was really hoping that might be a mascot. Does here say DrunkDeer. We have a red and blue color scheme going on, hot and cold, red and blue, red and blue. Expert in non-mechanical switch keyboard, which is technically true. These are mechanical-like switches, but because they're analog and they use the Hall effect, there's no actual mechanical mechanism inside each switch, right? So they are technically non-mechanical. Magnetic switch keyboard, it specifies down here. Other than that, you've got this very clean white aesthetic. If we come around the side, DrunkDeer. And a little bit of info tells us this is the black version. It comes in a black or a white colorway. I will be giving away the white one, of course. So make sure you enter that giveaway if you're interested. There will be a link down in the video description there, but this will be the black one that we're looking at here. On the ends, 75% layout, magnetic switch, and all that. On the back, DrunkDeer, founded by keyboard enthusiasts, invites you to discover great diversity of mechanical keyboard, even though it says on the front it's non-mechanical, but it's kind of a weird distinction. It's like a mechanical keyboard, but it's not technically mechanical. We present a new concept, non-mechanical switch. There you go. With no physical contact, it breaks the limitations of traditional mechanical switches and offers a new level of comfort and performance. Now, I must say, this, of course, is not a totally new concept. There are other companies out there making these kinds of switches. Wooting, of course, famously. But I believe even Razer has taken a crack at this type of switch. So, but they are certainly uncommon. They are not the usual type of switch. Join the revolution with DrunkDeer. Time is now. All right. I don't know if I would feel comfortable joining a DrunkDeer in a revolution, but we'll see if this keyboard inspires me. And this is Mac and Windows compatible, as you can see here. So, pretty simple box, not a whole lot to see. Let's open it up. Very slowly. Almost there. There we go. So this is a 75% layout keyboard, and as far as I know, that is the only size that DrunkDeer currently offers. So if you don't like that size, well, I guess you're out of luck. But perhaps they will have more layouts in future. I think 75% is a good choice because it's a very versatile, well-rounded layout. So inside the box here, we have ample padding foam, and then foam on top as well to protect. We lift that up, and there is our M75 under a dust cover. Of course, we have a couple of pack-ins here. We have some extra keycaps for the Windows mode. It comes with the Mac option and command keys by default, but you can swap that out if you like. The keycaps are ABS. I don't know if they're double shot or what. Let's I can get these open. Let's find out. There we go. Okay. So they are in fact not double shot, and nor are they dye sub. No. They are UV coated, I believe, which means the keycap is made from a single piece of this sort of white plastic, ABS plastic, and then it's coated with this matte finish, and the legends are kind of, I don't know if they're laser engraved or exactly how they're made, but the problem with this kind of keycap is that this finish can wear off over time. And I've had a keyboard with keycaps that did exactly that. Now, it took years, but it did eventually happen. Maybe manufacturing has improved since then on this style of keycap. I don't know. But generally, I associate this with cheaper keycaps, I have to say. ABS is sometimes considered a cheaper keycap material, but not necessarily. There are also some very expensive ABS keycaps out there, so the material itself doesn't actually tell us too much. I will say they are reasonably thick. A little bit of flex there, but not too bad. Thick enough, anyway, to feel robust, but I'm a little disappointed with the UV-coated ABS situation here, and the fact that these legends could potentially wear off in time, which would not happen with double shot or dye sub keycaps. In practical terms, like they're probably not going to on a reasonable time frame, but it's worth noting. Anyway, generally a cheaper type of keycap. The other issue that you can encounter with this type of keycap, sorry not to come back to this topic, but this kind of matte finish that they have, the coating, it looks really nice to start with, but it really gets oily very easily. You end up with kind of finger smudges that can become quite apparent on the tops of these keycaps, and I find it can make it look kind of bad, like kind of non-uniform, kind of grimy. Again, I don't know if this particular finish will kind of attract the finger smudges that way, but certainly I have seen others where it does. Alright, we've got here a keycap puller of the most basic variety. Plastic handle, but it is the wire style, which is good because that means we won't be scratching our keycaps if we use it. And we've got a really nice bag. I love this type of plastic. I think it sounds really nice. But perhaps more importantly, a USB cable. It is a USB type A on one end to USB type C on the other. And actually on the USB A end, look at that, we've got an adapter. So we pull that off, and it's actually a USB C to C cable, but we've just been given this adapter, a C to A adapter. That's kind of nice. That means you have flexibility for plugging it into any kind of USB port there. And this adapter is actually kind of nice. It's got an aluminum housing here, and looks pretty slick. So on the cable itself, however, just plastic housings. But the cable is fabric sleeved with the kind of braided sleeving style, and feels decent. Not the thickest and most robust such cable I've ever felt or seen, but not bad either. We've got a ferrite bead here. Sadly, no hook and loop fastener cable wrap, just a twist tie here. But we've got the adapter, and that is kind of nice. There we go. And of course, color matched in black. I expect that the white one will come with a white cable. I would certainly hope. Anyway, that's it in terms of accessories. So let's lift off this dust cover. And let's check out the keyboard itself. If I can get it out of here. Lift it out. Interestingly, I do not see any kind of user guide in here. Now, that could be because this is an early production model, or it could be because they just expect you to go online and find it there. But usually, there is at least a little QR code or something in here directing you to where online you can find a user guide. But there is nothing here. Nothing at all. So, pretty bare bones in that regard. Alright, let's bring the board around here and take a look. So, first impression, aesthetically, is that I think it looks nice. I like the matte black we've got with the keycaps, and then the accent colors are really appealing. They are those same colors that we saw on the front of the box, so that appears to be the theme. We of course have the exploded 75% layout where the arrow key cluster is slightly offset. Our nav cluster row is offset, and then we have the very popular these days rotary encoder, the knob. It is metal, has some nice detents in it. That feels good. The layout, 75% of course, is the sort of standard alphanumeric block over here with some smaller modifier keys down here because we need to accommodate our dedicated arrow keys. We've got a shortened shift and one U size alt function and control, or function 1 and function 2, as is the case on this board. We then, of course, have our full function row up here, and then we have a small column of nav cluster keys, which gives us a little additional functionality over something like a 60% layout. We have relatively thick bezels around the outer edge. The upper case appears to be a matte black ABS plastic. And if we take a look at it in profile, it is pretty simple. We've just got this basic wedge shape here. No features on the side. No features on the back except for our USB Type-C port for plugging it in. No features on this side either. You can see from this side that our metal knob here has some nice knurling on it. Give it a little bit of texture and grip. And nothing on the front edge either. So it's a very minimalistic design. Because it is this wedge shape, we do have a built-in angle to our typing experience, maybe 4 degrees or so. And then if we want, we could make it even more angled because we've got these flip-out feet here. Each one of these feet, of course, has a little silicone bit on the end to protect from slippage. And we also have 1, 2, 3, 4. No, just 4 silicone feet here. These are just little plastic bumps. Very, very straightforward and simple layout on the back here. Nothing to see really, except for a sticker that says DrunkDeer A75. Please do not place the keyboard in a high temp or high magnet environment. Fair enough. You can learn more about their magnetic switch on their website. Then some certifications. And that's pretty much that. I will say overall, this board feels pretty light. I'm not feeling a whole lot of heft to this board. And the plastic feels a little on the hollow, a little on the cheap side. I'm willing to bet that if I give it a little bit of a flex, there's probably going to be some creakiness to it. Let's find out though. Let's give it a little. Okay, to DrunkDeer's credit, really very little creakiness there. Not much flex either. What you can hear, interestingly, is you can hear the dampening foam in there. This keyboard does have 2 layers of dampening foam, one under the top plate above the PCB and then another below the PCB. So we should have some acoustic dampening going on here. So we've already looked at the keycaps, but I'll pull another one off so we can take a look at the switch underneath and the plate as well. The plate is, I believe, aluminum. And there we go. It is in black, it seems. Here's another one of those UV coated ABS keycaps. This one feels a little less thick, a little flexier. You can see there's definitely some flex in there. Definitely some flex. And below that we have a switch. Now, to the best of my knowledge, this is not a hot swappable keyboard, so I'm not going to try and yank this switch out. But truth be told, because it is a Hall effect switch, it operates on a different principle. I wouldn't expect it to be hot swappable anyway, because you're not going to be able to put conventional mechanical switches in this board. The only thing you could swap it out for would be other switches from DrunkDeer, presumably, which I don't think they have yet. As far as I know, this linear switch is all they've got. So here we have the typical, Cherry MX compatible cross style stem. You could put other keycaps on here if you wanted. And a little box style surround, which is generally there to improve stability. And if I give this a little wiggle, let's feel. So it has some east-west wiggle, less north-south wiggle, more east-west wiggle. It's not too bad though. It's not egregious or anything like that. We can see that the upper housing is translucent plastic of some kind, and we actually have a lens at the top, which is to help diffuse the light from the LED underneath. Clearly it's a north-facing LED because we've got our lens on the top side here. Not that it matters too much because, again, we're not able to remove the switches, so the LED placement is kind of moot. And for that matter, the keycaps are not shine-through, as far as I know. Well, maybe they are. I guess we'll find out in a moment. With this style of keycap, actually, they very well could be. So maybe I'm misspeaking there. We'll see. But let's just get up real close and give it a little listen. Give it a little listen. Let's listen to this switch. So this is a linear switch. It should be nice and smooth from top to bottom. Well, that's very harmonic. Listen. It's almost musical, but that's probably not a desirable feature. That ping, I don't know if that comes from the spring, which this switch will have. There will be a spring in there, obviously, to provide resistance, or if that comes from the plate or something else in here. Interesting. Well, what's that going to sound like when we're typing? I don't know. But I will say the action is very smooth. It's quite stable. And actually a fairly pleasing feel. And bottom out. That ping, though, has me a little concerned. It's very, very tonal. It's kind of musical. If every single one of these makes that sound, well, it's going to be interesting. But we will find out. We have stabilizers, of course, on this board. Every board has stabilizers under the long keys. On their website, DrunkDeer, makes a lot of noise about their stabilizer tuning. They claim that they've put a lot of time and attention into it. So, as I always say, stabilizers make the board. You can have a very high-end board with poorly tuned stabs, and it's going to sound cheap and bad. So, if they manage to tune them well, that could be a real boon to this board. So, let's test it out. We will see. We'll start with the backspace key. Okay, yes, they have clearly put attention into these stabs. Very nice, really well stabilized. No rattle, no tick, really smooth. Let's hear the enter key. So on the enter, we've got a little bit of tick over on the right-hand side. But overall, not bad. The backspace key is better though. Our right shift won't have any stabilizers under it because it's short. Our left shift will though. Let's hear it. Very minor tick, but generally pretty good. Backspace is still best, but number 1, 2, 3 in terms of rankings. And the space bar, the hardest one of all to get right, you guys. Can they do it? Let's hear it. Not really. It's not the worst space bar I've heard, not by a long shot, but it definitely has some rattle to it. It's got quite a bit of tick. Listen. Backspace does not. spacebar definitely does. So the spacebar could use a little work for sure. But overall, I'd say an above average showing for the stabilizers. We started off really great with that backspace. I wish they all felt like and sounded like that one. Let's pull off the enter. And let's just see what's going on underneath. Okay, so underneath we have lubed stabs. Always good to see. Factory lubrication. Hopefully you can see it. But in there on both the stems and in there on the wire, these are plate mount. So you could, in theory, take them out, but that would require you to take the switch out, which I don't think we can do. So you're kind of stuck just, if you wanted to inject some lube in there, you could, but you're not going to be taking it out and putting pads under it or anything, clipping or Band-Aid modding, for example. Wholly modding, you're not going to be wholly modding unless you can get that switch off. And again, I do not believe that these are hot swappable. I will correct myself if they are, but and then of course we also have a clicky scroll wheel there, or volume wheel. What am I trying to say? A knob, a rotary encoder. Now, I did notice when I pressed down, that kind of musical element, that ping, is still present. Although it's a little different than the ping on the switches, so I don't know. Anyway, I think there's something going on in the structure of this board that is transmitting resonance, vibrations. So it'll be very interesting to hear how this sounds when I'm full on typing. Anyway, interesting though. Interesting so far. And up next, we're going to take a look at the backlighting. So let's turn off the lights and take a look at the RGB. Okay, so here we have the DrunkDeer A75 plugged in and looking mighty colorful, as one might expect. These are, of course, shine-through keycaps. So I was initially mistaken when I, for some reason, thought they might not be, but of course they are, because that's why DrunkDeer opted for the UV-coated style of keycap rather than a dye sub, for example. And it does make for really nice, crisp, sharp, vivid legends. I can't deny that, even though I don't like the feel of the keycaps as much as some other options. They do look really nice. So, and I think the LEDs look pretty nice too. Now, you might be seeing a little bit of flicker on the camera, but when I checked before I started recording, I didn't see much, if any, flicker in the viewfinder or on the screen. So maybe it doesn't look flickery to you. Anyway, regardless, whatever the case may be for you, there's no flicker visible in person. If there is any flicker, it's just the result of the frequency of the LEDs interacting with the shutter speed of the camera. But in person, it looks nice and bright, and the gradients look smooth. So the default RGB that we get here is this pinwheel effect. We do have a variety of options, however, as is typical for keyboards that feature RGB LEDs these days. They are configurable in both hardware and software. I will talk about the software in a few minutes. We won't be looking at it in the video today because, quite frankly, it's kind of a tedious, well, it's not really that tedious, but it's kind of boring. And I find that people don't tend to watch that section of the video when I include footage of the software. So I'll just tell you about the software, but we'll get to that in a few minutes. Right now, let's just go through the hardware controls for the RGB. So, interestingly, this keyboard has two function layers, function and function 2, which is actually really useful because the software does give us the ability to bind both of those function layers. And function 1 is actually a blank layer, so you can do whatever you want with that. Function 2 seems to be where all the action happens in terms of the hardware control of the lights and such. So function 2, left and right, are how we control our backlight. And we start on the pinwheel, like I said. Here's a solid color. When we're on a solid color mode, we can hold down function 2 and press tab to cycle through a handful of preset colors. And once again, as you can see, they're pretty vivid. Not that many of them, but it was that red. So we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So 7 preset colors. I guess that's fairly typical. In software, you have much more granular control of the colors. So function left arrow will take us back to the previous setting. Function right arrow moves us forward. There's a breathing mode. There's another breathing mode. I don't know what the difference is. Oh, maybe that was going through colors. Here's a reactive mode. Here's another reactive mode, I guess. There's sort of a raindrops mode or twinkling stars, a sine wave. The animation is pleasingly smooth. Sometimes it can look really chunky. It's not the case here. Here's an outside-in kind of RGB wave, top-down RGB wave. Another reactive mode. That's an interesting one. Don't think I've actually seen one quite like that before. Okay, now here we've got a ripple mode, but it's way crazy fast. I don't believe there's any speed control here in hardware. I think there is speed control in the software. I think I did see that for the lighting modes. It's too bad that they don't offer that just in hardware. This is a lot slower, more relaxed. It's kind of nice. Oh yeah, this one. Okay, so it kind of just meanders its way around the keyboard. Watch. Isn't that interesting? It just kind of moves around the keyboard of its own accord. It's like a snake just kind of going around. I'm pretty sure in software this was called like ravenous worm or ravenous snake or something like that, which I thought was maybe the best name for a lighting mode I've encountered in a while. And here's another back and forth kind of RGB wave. Well, that's an interesting kind of rotating one. Not quite like the first one. A little different. Another reactive mode by line. Oh, that's kind of explosions all over the board in random spots. And back to our original pinwheel. So, you know, there's a decent variety of presets here, and even a few that I haven't quite seen before, so that's kind of fun. Generally, they look pretty good. Like I said, I think the animations look smooth. The gradients in the color look nice. The colors themselves fairly vivid, and the keycaps have those nice crisp legends. So all that's pretty good. We do also have brightness settings. We can go function 2, press down and go through quite a few levels of brightness. So we have off, and we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. I don't know. I don't know how we know when we max out. Sometimes you get a flashing light indicator, but not so here. So I'm not quite sure. But 10-ish levels of brightness looks like. There's a few other controls that we have here. One that's actually really cool. This one, however, is not so cool. It's just pretty basic. We can swap between Windows and Mac mode with function W, or function 2W, I should say, for Windows mode, function 2M for Mac mode. Nice and easy. It defaulted to Mac mode for me, so my Windows key wasn't working. Just in case you run into that issue, function 2W will switch you into Windows mode. The cool feature that I was talking about is we have hardware control of our actuation point. This is really neat, and I don't think that competitors like Wooting actually have this. So what we can do here is go function 2 and press any number from 1 through 9, and those correspond to different actuation points. So if we go function 1, you can see the 1 flashes there to indicate that that profile is engaged. So on this setting, the actuation point is really high. 0.2 millimeters is all you have to press down on one of these keys to actuate it. It's just a feather touch because they're very light keys to start with. So at this preset, you barely have to breathe on them to actuate them. And that's handy for certain kinds of gaming, OSU, for example, or anything where you want just a hair trigger. Conversely, function 2 and 9 gives you a really deep actuation point. You have to press all the way down to 3.6 millimeters, which is basically bottoming out. And so if you're the kind of person that's a really heavy typer, or you tend to let your fingers sit quite heavily on the keys, and you don't want to accidentally trigger key presses, maybe that's what you want. Of course, function 2 and 5 gives us a nice middle ground, which will roughly be close to kind of what you're probably used to on a typical mechanical switch. And then everything in between is in between. So I think that's a neat feature. I like that they give us hardware control, just really quick and easy control over our actuation point. For me, I actually like a pretty high actuation point, so I've been keeping it on 3 or so, which I think corresponds to 0.6 millimeters. But yeah, a neat feature. Nice to see. Aside from that, we really don't have much. We, of course, have our rotary encoder, our knob up here, but we can't control the functionality of that knob. It just does what it does. Volume on the rotation and play pause when we press it down. So this actually is a good segue into talking about the software, and I'll keep this pretty quick. The software is still in beta, and it is fairly rough. They even say that when you go to install it. It installs as something called Keyboard OEM Driver. So on their website, they call it their Antler software, So clearly they intend to brand it, but it's just still in development. And actually, when you fire it up, the title bar up at the top there says beta software for testing only, or something like that. So it's pretty rough and early as of the time of recording, but the keyboard is brand new, so I will give DrunkDeer some slack in that regard. Bit of leeway. It It's not prominently featured on their website. You have to scroll all the way down to the very bottom, and then at the bottom you will see a heading that says software. Click on that, downloads right there. That is also where you find the keyboard manual, because we did not get the paper manual in the box, but you can find it in PDF form down at the bottom of DrunkDeer's website. The software, for its part, despite being in very rough beta form, is fairly functional. It has a firmware update option, and in fact, it automatically prompts you to update the firmware when you start it up if your firmware is not up to date. If you refuse that firmware update, the software just closes. So you have to update your firmware. It did take me a couple of tries to get it to do that right, but I think that might have been because I test keyboard driver software in a virtual machine, because no offense to DrunkDeer or any of the other brands I review here, but I don't always trust random EXEs from companies that I had never heard of prior to, unboxing their keyboard. So just as a precaution, I do all my testing in a VM sandbox. The good news is I was able to get the firmware to update, and that issue I had could have been due to the fact that I was running it in a VM. Sometimes the USB pass through with the VM is kind of weird. Configuring the USB devices you have plugged into your VM can be... Anyway, it doesn't matter. That's not an issue you're going to run into. I did scan the software with AVG, which is the software that I use for my antivirus and malware bytes as well. It appears clean, according to both of them, and I did not notice any weird, egregious connections when monitoring with glass wires, so I think it's safe. I can't promise. I'm not a cybersecurity researcher, but it seems okay. In terms of functionality, everything you expect is there. You have the keyboard remapping on a per key basis. You have lighting control on a per key basis. You have profiles. You can save your lighting and key mappings too. Like I said, for the key mappings, you can map on default layer, function 1 or function 2 layers, which is great to see. You can also record macros and bind those to either of those function layers. Also great to see. Now, you can also control the sensitivity in software on a per key basis rather than just using the presets that I talked about earlier. So if you want to configure that actuation point in software for individual keys, you can do that. And this is where another really cool feature comes into play. This board has the ability to trigger 2 different keystrokes per key press, which again, I don't think Wu-Tang does, and I've not seen before on other analog or Hall effect switch keyboards. So what that means is you can have a high actuation point, say 0.4 millimeters, that triggers 1 key press, and then if you continue to press down through the key press, you can have another actuation point trigger further down. So you can have 1 high and 1 low, and each of those can be configured to a different binding. That's a neat feature. Again, I don't think I've seen that elsewhere before. I tested it out. It does work. So now, where you would actually use that, hard to say. You'd have to have very good control of your pressure on the key if you wanted to use it in a practical gaming scenario. Have 2 binds on 1 key, but you could do it, and I like that it's an option. I think it's pretty cool. So that is available in software, and it does work. You also have a monitoring mode where you can press down on a switch, and it will show you how far you've pressed it. So it just gives you kind of the analog input visualization. However, what I noticed the software is missing is the ability to configure any kind of analog response. So We can't adjust the analog force curve or response curve, I should say, or anything to that effect. And indeed, I am not sure that this keyboard actually translates the magnetic signal into an analog signal, because I tested it out in a couple of racing or driving games, Forza Horizon 5, Euro Truck Simulator 2. And while I could notice the different actuation point when I was, feathering the accelerator, I couldn't notice analog input. So other companies like, I will again say Wooting, have it built into their software that I think the software takes the analog input from the keyboard and translates that into analog input for software by emulating essentially analog input from like a controller, like a trigger, an analog trigger or a thumbstick or something like that. I don't believe that DrunkDeer software does that, and I think it's the software layer that makes that magic happen. By default, I don't think Windows recognizes that this is in fact analog input. It will simply register as a digital trigger when you hit that actuation point, right? It's binary. It's either on or off. You don't get that full range of analog input. And like I said, I don't think DrunkDeer's software is doing this, and therefore I don't think Windows recognizes these inputs as analog. Certainly when I tested and swapped between the DrunkDeer board and the Wooting 60HE, I could immediately tell that the Wooting 60 was giving analog input. The game was recognizing that. You could feather the accelerator. You could, finesse the steering with that analog input. Not the case with the DrunkDeer board. So, anyhow, I've talked a lot about the software here, more than I intended to, and you've just been staring at the same pattern for a while. So, you're going to stare at this keyboard for a little longer. I'll switch up the RGB, though, for the next section, because this is pretty much all I have to talk about with the RGB and configurability. This is not a wireless board. There's nothing to talk about in that regard. And we've sort of gone over the lighting and software options. I will stress once again the rotary encoder, sadly, the knob, not configurable in software. Every other key seems to be, though. Okay, next up is the typing test. You guys get to hear and see this board in action. I'll be interested to know what you think. Well, you won't get to tell me, but I'll tell you what I think once we're done the typing test, and you'll have made some opinions, formed some opinions by that time, probably. So, typing test, and after that we'll talk about my usage impressions and my overall feelings about the DrunkDeer A75. But first, it's time to listen to this thing. And there you have it, the DrunkDeer A75 in action. So, where does that leave us? Well, I'll be honest with you. This keyboard is a bit of a mixed bag. It has some things that I like about it, that it does quite well, and it has some things that I take issue with and that I think put it at a disadvantage in some ways. So let's start with the good stuff. Overall, I've had very few problems with this keyboard. It functions fine. It's not a bad keyboard. It's not a broken keyboard, nothing like that. There are a few little glitches here and there, which we'll talk about in a little bit, but overall, it's a serviceable keyboard. It does the things you expect a keyboard to do. It does them reasonably well, and that honestly does put it ahead of first try products from some other companies that I've tested before. So DrunkDeer is to be commended for that, for shipping a solid functional product for their first attempt. And it does have some real cool things that I quite enjoyed. The first, or the foremost, for me at least, is the adjustable actuation points on these Hall effect switches and the ability to change them on the fly using the keyboard shortcuts. That is a really novel feature. I've not seen that before, and it works really well. It's nice to be able to switch between, a nice high actuation point while gaming for those hair trigger reactions to something that's more reasonable for typing, sort of in the mid-range here. So that's really cool. Similarly, these magnetic switches allow that really unique double press functionality. As I said earlier, I don't think I've seen that anywhere else before. And the ability to trigger two different keystrokes with one key press could be quite useful to somebody. Not me. I'm not that much of a power user or a pro gamer, but I'm sure somebody could make use of that. And it's pretty cool to see. Also, I want to shout out the inclusion of an extra cable, the USB, or I should say, extra adapter. The USB C to C cable that's included also comes with that C to A adapter. It's nice that DrunkDeer thought to include both options. That's not something I see often, and maybe it's something we'll start seeing more, but I was happy to see it, so props for that. Also, the layout, the 75% layout, it's becoming quite common these days. It's, in the enthusiast, maybe that's the wrong term, but in the, I don't know, even in the mainstream space these days, I guess, but in people who know a little more about their keyboards or looking for something a little different, the 75% layout is quite popular with good reason. It covers all the functions you need without any that you generally don't. If you don't need a numpad, 75% is where it's at. The exploded 75% layout is, of course, aesthetically pleasing. And we have this nice metal knob up here, which sounds and feels good and, looks really nice. So, also, the 75% layout puts the DrunkDeer A75 in a very specific niche because, like I started off the video talking about, I think this board is largely gunning for the Wooting keyboards, which also have magnetic Hall effect switches and do similar things to this board, but Wooting does not yet, at least, have a 75% layout. And so if you want magnetic switches and you want a 75% layout, well, this is the only keyboard fulfilling that niche as far as I'm aware. And they're also undercutting Wooting on price, which is definitely a benefit. The Wooting 60HE comes in at, I believe, about $190 US dollars, if memory serves, which is not cheap. This board is nominally 150 US dollars, but it seems like one way or another, there's almost always a discount to be obtained on it. For example, code ASMR down below in the video description. Using my link and that code, you can save 30% on this board, which brings it down to, about $100, a little over, which is significant savings over boards from the likes of Wu-Ting. So definitely competing on price. And I will say the sound signature and feel of these switches, it did grow on me. At first, I really wasn't sure. The switches, they do feel very nice in that they are very stable and very smooth and very light as well. But, and I should also say, the bottom out sound is pleasant. There's a pleasant marbliness that they've managed to achieve here, which is actually really nice. But there's also that metallic element to it, which you no doubt heard on the typing test. It's a metallic resonance. I don't think it's to do with spring ping. I think it's more to do with something, maybe the aluminum plate in here resonating. And that to me is a really unappealing feel and sound in the sound signature. And so at first that really turned me off, the typing feel and sound of the A75. But as I've been using it, it's bothering me less, I guess I will say. And I'm starting to appreciate that marbliness a bit more. And so, like a lot of elements of this board, the sound and typing feel are a bit of a mixed bag. There's some stuff to like there. There's some stuff to take issue with as well. But overall, it's not going to be for everyone in terms of the way it feels and sounds. And I think that DrunkDeer could do a better job with the sound dampening by adding in maybe some silicone, maybe a silicone dampener in the bottom. That would benefit the solidity and the sound, but also the weight, because if we're kind of moving into some of the criticisms I have here, this keyboard just kind of feels a bit cheap, I have to be honest. The plastic is fine, but it doesn't look especially amazing, and it has just a feeling of just a bit of hollowness to it. It's quite light. Maybe that's what's really getting me. It's quite light. It's a bit of creakiness, although less than I expected. There you can hear that dampening foam again as we flex it. But I think it's the combination of the lightness and the keycaps that, for me, make it feel kind of cheap. The keycaps are probably my least favorite part of the design and the build quality. They are that UV coated ABS, which looks really nice when it's all illuminated in the dark, like you saw there. Nice sharp legends, very crisp, very vivid, but it doesn't feel great. In particular, these keycaps really get mucky very easily. And I'm going to try and show you here. Maybe you'll be able to see, I don't know. But maybe you can see sort of the greasy fingerprint spots on some of the keys. And kind of mucky fingerprints that have developed as I've used this board over the last couple of weeks. Obviously, you can resolve that just by wiping it, with a cloth or whatever. But it just means you can especially see it actually here on the space bar. That's maybe the best spot for it. You see that kind of just griminess? It just looks cheap, and it feels kind of cheap as well under the fingers. And this type of keycap is less durable over the long run. Eventually, that black coating might start to wear off, and then your legends will start to disappear with it as it rubs away. As I said earlier, I did have a keyboard once, many years ago, that had that happen to it. Now, maybe the manufacturing has improved since then. Maybe they are more durable than that, but I still prefer die sub or double shot personally. So the keycaps, on the plus side, the stabilizers are well done. Not perfect, but generally pretty good. The backspace is a standout. Very nice and smooth. No rattle. The space bar is at the other end of the spectrum. We've got some tick. We've got some rattle. It could definitely be better. But overall, it's clear the DrunkDeer did pay attention to the stabilizers. They did lube them. They did what they could. And I think from the factory, it's not too bad. You could go in there, make some modifications, but that brings us to another drawback of this keyboard, which is non-hot swappable switches, because you're not going to be swapping in any conventional mechanical switches, because this has the Hall effect switches and the PCB is designed for those magnetic switches. This is, of course, an issue inherent to any such keyboard, including the Wooting boards. So that's sort of inescapable with this style of switch, but it does mean that you're stuck with what you've got. If one of them goes faulty, you're kind of out of luck. If you don't like the typing feel or sound, you're kind of out of luck. And it's really challenging to disassemble because you'd have to desolder all of the switches. So if you wanted to really get in there and do any modding on the stabilizers, it's a lot more work than on your average hot swap board these days. So those are some of my concerns with the typing sound and feel and overall build quality. My final issue really with it is what appears to be the lack of analog input on switches that, at least at a hardware level, should be able to do that. So one of the biggest selling points for the Wooting boards, the 60HE for example, is the ability to provide analog input that emulates analog input from, say, an analog trigger on a controller or a thumbstick on a controller, and that allows very fine control of gradients of, say, motion. Case in point, as I mentioned previously, driving games are a really good example where you can sort of feather the key, and that is like feathering the accelerator and allows you to have the gas on just a little bit or all the way. A conventional mechanical switch is either on or off. It's binary, right? But these magnetic switches, they can measure the height of the switch, how much you've pressed it down all the way from top to bottom. And that enables Wooting to then emulate that analog input for like acceleration or steering or whatever. But the way they do that is with their software, which takes the analog input, the magnetic signal from the board, and translates it into something that Windows and therefore your games will understand. I think it does that by emulating analog input from a controller. As far as I can tell, the DrunkDeer A75 doesn't do that. Now, in their software, they do have a mode you can toggle where it'll show you how much you're pressing down on a key. You can see that analog motion in the graphic in their software. But I don't see any way to then map that to input in a game or to adjust the response curve or anything to that effect. All you can do, it seems, is adjust the actuation point. So this is an important distinction. If you really want that analog control on a keyboard, this is not your keyboard as far as I can tell. And this is corroborated by the fact that nowhere in DrunkDeer's advertising, nowhere on their website, nowhere in their software does it mention analog input at all. It's just not mentioned. So it's a little curious to me that the hardware technically would support that, but it seems that the software does not. So, as I said, if you're looking for analog input, this is not your board. It will do, of course, the adjustable actuation point, but not the analog control. So that is maybe the biggest bummer, I guess, if you are looking for a cheaper wooting alternative and you like the 75% layout. Now, maybe it's something that DrunkDeer will add in the future. I don't know. There's no indication in the software that that is the case, but again, I feel like the hardware support is there. It maybe just requires a software layer in the middle layer to translate that from the magnetic input to something that your games can use as analog input. And finally, since we're talking about software, I will say the software is really raw right now. is pretty, early. To their credit, most of the functions did work. I didn't actually run into too many problems, but just the presentation is pretty raw, and it's clearly in testing still. It says so right on the software. So it's an early product. It's brand new. So, take that with a grain of salt. That might not be the case by the time you are looking at this keyboard or video, but that was my experience. And I did encounter a few oddities, we'll call them, with the board in general. One being some of the key mapping's a little weird. We have, of course, a dedicated F row key, or F key row up here. And normally the way that works is the default function is F1, F2, F3, F4 as you press down on it. And then you hold down function, and then you get your secondary functions, which here we have, media functions, brightness control, those sorts of things. Weirdly, for the default configuration on this board, it seems like some of the F keys do their F key function, whereas others by default do their secondary function. For example, F5 and F6 seem to, by default, adjust the backlight. If I want the F5 button to work as F5, I have to hold down function and press F5. And yet F2, for example, works as F2. If I want its secondary function, then I have to hold down function and press F2. That's kind of weird. I know. Oh, and the F8 play pause didn't seem to work at all when I held down function and pressed F8. It just never did what it was supposed to do. So I don't quite get that. Fortunately, play pause control is here by pressing the rotary encoder. But that brings me to another small gripe, which is that you can't rebind the functionality of pressing down on the rotary encoder. It's going to be play pause no matter what you do, as well as rotating is going to be volume no matter what you do. So it's little things like that, small inconsistencies, little bugs or glitches in the experience that remind me that this is a very early product. It is brand new from a brand new company. DrunkDeer's website straight up says that they formed in December 2022. Now, I don't know if they are spun off from some other company or have connections to some manufacturers or OEMs, right? Or who knows. But at any rate, if they only formed in December of 2022, here we are in late April of 2023. That seems like a very short window to spin up a company, develop a product, manufacture a product, and get it to market. And some of the newness of this company and the product definitely shows in the final product. But overall, it is an interesting product. It is an imperfect mixed bag of a product, but there is some interesting ideas here. And you know me, I really do like to see companies trying new stuff, innovating in the keyboard space, competing, and bringing more features to more people at more accessible price points. And I will say that this keyboard does do that. Again, we get those magnetic switches at what is a fairly appealing price point, especially if you use the discount down below in the video description. But even without that discount, I happen to notice that right now, or at the time of recording, DrunkDeer was selling this for, I believe, $130, so that's $20 off of their MSRP, their listed $150 price point. And then if you sign up for their newsletter, I think, mailing list or something, you get another $10 off. So that brings it down to $120, which is not quite as cheap as if you use my discount code. But point being, clearly they are selling this at a lower price point than what they're actually, saying it costs. And I suspect at most times you can probably get this, or will be able to get it, for between $100 and $120 or so. And that is significantly cheaper than competing boards with the magnetic switches. So if you are really budget minded, and if you don't mind buying into a new product from a new company that might have a few little glitches, and if you are specifically looking for a mechanical or non-mechanical keyboard, as they say, with magnetic switches in a 75% layout, but without the analog input, well, this is your keyboard, my friend. It's a pretty narrow niche, but there is an audience and a market for this keyboard, specific though it may be. If, however, you are a general, keyboard user, the mechanical switches aren't important, or I should say the magnetic switches are less important for you, and you're just looking for a good budget 75% keyboard, in that case, I would say there are lots of better options that offer you more flexibility with, for example, hot swap sockets. But if you are in that very particular narrow segment looking for those magnetic switches, the 75% layout, all that, then give this a look. Check it out. Click through on that link down below and see if you like what you see. Well, I guess you've already seen it if you've watched the video, but maybe you've made up your mind by now. Or click on through the link for the giveaway in the video description, because I have another one of these. I have a white one in a box, unopened. And so the winner of that giveaway will receive that keyboard, or this black one if you really want. If you win, if you really want this one. It's just been unboxed and it's a little mucky, but I could clean it up for you. Either way, make sure that you check out that giveaway. All the details are available at the link down in the video description. But I wish you the best of luck in winning one of these keyboards. Now, my friends, that's it. That's the whole story. That's my opinions and feelings on the DrunkDeer A75. I may be able to give you my opinions and evaluation of this keyboard. I'm less qualified to give my opinions on the name DrunkDeer. Maybe it's meant to be memorable. I don't know. It has certainly stuck in my mind and will probably stick in yours. Although this very first outing from DrunkDeer is a little rough around the edges, I am very curious to see what they produce and do in the future. It's not uncommon for startup companies like this to have a mixed bag of a first product and then really nail it on subsequent refinements and subsequent products. So consider me intrigued, DrunkDeer, and I look forward to seeing what else they produce in the future. Well, my friends, I do hope that you enjoyed this video. I hope you found it informative. I hope you found it relaxing. And I look very forward to having you back here next time. Farewell for now, my friends. Hey, did you guys know that we have some really cool people supporting this channel and the content that I create? It's absolutely true. You can see all of their names right here. That's why I call this the special thanks section. These are the supporters of this channel on YouTube memberships and on Patreon. And you, dear listener, dear viewer, could be one of these people. I mean, maybe you already are, but if you're not, you could be. These individuals not only get their names here in the credits, but also some other fun perks like early access to my weekend videos, and at higher tiers, they get to help me decide the topic of a video once a month. And at the highest tier, the Fusroda tier, they get their names read out in a very special thank you shout out in every video. And that is what you are about to hear right now. Our Fusroda tier supporters for this video are Ragnar Ragnarsson, James C., Captain Vanquisher, Dragoon 88, Drummer Brit, Angel Garcia, The Blacktooth Bob, Jake Luffney, and Rango Steele. What a legendary group of individuals. Thank you so much to all of our Fusroda tier supporters for their immense generosity. Once again, if you are not a supporter of this channel, but would like to be, would like to help me continue to make the kinds of videos that I like to make and that you hopefully like to watch, make sure to check out the links down below in the video description for my YouTube memberships or my Patreon. Thanks once again to all of our awesome channel supporters.